Uh, we're going to have a speaker talk about what I kind of think of as the other war, which is the occupation of Afghanistan. It's of particular interest to me because I think we were lied into Iraq, but we were lied into Afghanistan too, because we went there looking for Osama, and we couldn't find him. And you think there might be a reason for that, like that we weren't really looking? So I'm going to let Emma Allen of Radical Women talk about the occupation of Afghanistan.
Hi, I'm Emma Allen of the Radical Women, a socialist feminist women's leadership training organization. And one of the reasons we are here today is to stand in solidarity with Afghanistan and demand an end to the U.S. occupation in that country. The Bush-endorsed religious fundamentalism that seeks to oppress my rights in this country, including civil liberties and reproductive rights, is the same fundamentalism that is supporting the regime in Afghanistan that violently oppresses women there. October 7th, 2007 will mark the 6th year of U.S. occupation in that country. The year the U.S. threw out one U.S.-supported regime and replaced it with another. This invasion happened with the lie that Afghanistan, especially Afghani women, were going to be liberated from the cruel patriarchal code of the Taliban. 6 years since this so-called democratic government of President Hamid Karzai was installed, their misery still very much remains. Today, the Afghan people are still violently oppressed by the resurgence of the Taliban and installment of the U.S.-backed Northern Alliance fundamentalists. The Northern Alliance are a conflict-ridden coalition of tribal leaders and made up of many notorious warlords and drug mafia. Fundamentally, oil has been the root of the U.S. occupation in this country as well as in Iraq. Afghanistan is strategically situated between the oil-supplying Middle East and massive potential world markets. U.S. intervention began almost 30 years ago when a coup covertly backed the Mujahideen, Islamic fundamentalist fighters from which the Taliban sprang. This was in order to incite rebellion against the Soviet-backed secular regime that threatened Western interests. This coup plunged Afghanistan into chaos and misery for years to come and cost 1.5 million lives. Today, Afghanistan has one of the world's lowest life expectancies of 44.6 years. Only 6% of the country receives electricity, and 25% receives running water and sanitation. It has the highest malnutrition rate at 70%, and illiteracy is at 80%. The U.S. occupied Afghanistan largely on the pretense that women were going to be liberated. Women and girls have suffered the most under this U.S.-sponsored fundamentalist regime. There have been intensified attacks and killings on girl students, their teachers, and schools. Suicide among women is at an all-time high due to pressure of jobless widowhood and forced marriage and homelessness. Domestic violence occurs with impunity, as do rapes and stoning of women by the Northern Alliance. At least 1 out of 3 Afghan women have been beaten, forced into sex, or otherwise abused. Afghanistan has received $12 billion in aid, but there have been no serious signs of reconstruction in that country. The Afghan people are not benefiting from the construction money due to theft by warlords and misuse by the NGOs. Private businesses such as Dynacor, Halliburton, and the Burger Group are looting money, aid money which is being funneled back to the wealthy donor countries. Government corruption and fraud directs billions of dollars into the pockets of high-ranking officials. After all this, the government is unable to provide the basics of electricity, food, and water for its people. The Afghanis are not silent victims. Many protests have expressed rage at the occupiers, the puppet government, the edifices of wealth, and the rip-offs. Afghanis are deeply fed up with the current situation, and every day that passes they turn against the government, the foreign troops, and the warlords. U.S. bombs, B-52s, and the presence of thousands of U.S. troops were never to bring about liberation and democracy in this country. It is under the U.S.'s strategic and economic interest to put U.S. troops and Afghani people in danger as long as its own interests are served. The first step for real progress and true reconstruction in Afghanistan has to be the withdrawal of U.S. troops. We, in the U.S., can play a great role in coming together, organizing against the war, and demanding that the U.S. troops be taken out of Afghanistan and reparations be made to rebuild this country. This will clear the way for eradicating economic equality and fight that will require international working class support. This is the only way to give support to give hope to Afghanistan. And on October 13th at the Brigham Roses Center, Radical Women will be having a video showing called Enemies of Happiness about the fight for a secular government by a feminist activist there. Thank you.
Okay, how many people like the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights? You know, it's a pretty good idea. It might not be perfect, but it's a good idea, right? And it's been under attack. So Tom Nelson is a lawyer who mostly does pro bono work in the area of civil and human rights. And he's going to talk about defending the Constitution.
Thank you. Since 9/11, I became also involved in some terrorism work. My first client was that terrorist, Brandon Mayfield. I want to talk a little bit about what happened with Brandon because it reflects a much deeper problem in our society. Basically, the real harm to America didn't occur in 9/11 when about 3,000 people were killed, or for that matter over the last 5, 6, 7 years when another 100, 200, 300, 400,000 people were killed. Those are tragedies. But the real tragedy here is the loss of our civil liberties. And the reason we are losing our civil liberties is because our leaders are afraid. And we got to overcome that fear. There are 3 examples of losses of civil liberties here in Oregon. You haven't heard a lot about 2 of them. You've heard about Brandon Mayfield. I want to tell you about all 3. Brandon, of course, was a fellow who was arrested under the 4th Amendment of the Constitution. In order to be arrested or have your premises searched and seized, there has to be probable cause that a crime is being committed, and a judge must issue a warrant. Fear, however, overtook Congress when it passed the Patriot Act, and it said no longer need a judge issue a probable cause warrant. All he has to do is say that there's probable cause that there is significant investigative activity going on. A really loose standard, really watered down the probable cause standard of the 4th Amendment. That led to the bugging of Brandon Mayfield. That led to listening devices being inserted in his home being searched physically. We know that now because the United States, the FBI, the gold standard of forensic evidence, blew a fingerprint. They mismatched it. What they said was an incontrovertible match turned out to be wrong. Brandon was freed, a judge made a mistake, but that search would not have occurred from the beginning if there had been that probable cause requirement. Point 2, there's a fellow in Algeria another tie to Oregon, that has a tie to Oregon. He's the head of the sister charity of Al Haramain Islamic Foundation out of Asna. He was taken out of Tanzania, taken to Afghanistan. Extraordinary rendition. I interviewed him last January. Extraordinary rendition. He was tortured for 4 months before he was interrogated. When the interrogations began, it turned out again that there had been a mistake. The CIA had intercepted a phone call and thought that he was trying to buy airplanes. Actually, he was trying to buy tires from his brother-in-law, but they misinterpreted or mistranslated the word. The result, Laid Saidi spent 16 months in Afghanistan. The CIA admitted its mistake and freed him. He is the head of a sister charity of the one that I represent down in Ashland, Oregon. That is Al Haramain Islamic Foundation, which also has ties to Oregon, obviously. That organization was charged with, designated as a terrorist, but when the time came to indict it, no terrorism indictment, a tax indictment. Okay? So the foundation challenged it, they dropped the case. Now, however, the co-founder, a man of peace himself, a great American of Iranian extraction, Pete Seda, is still in jail. He came back to the United States to face the trial voluntarily on his own nickel. Not a flight risk, and certainly not a danger to the community, but he's still in jail six weeks after he got home. The point of all this is fear is what is driving our country. It's fear that drove Congress, it's fear to enact the Patriot Act. And it's that fear that we have to overcome. The fact that we're here today indicates that we're not afraid. But we got to tell our fellow Americans not to be afraid. Benjamin Franklin said, those who would surrender freedom to gain security deserve neither. And I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Okay, one of my favorite slogans for situations like this, it's unfortunately kind of perennially a good one, is healthcare, not warfare. And we have Dana Wellte, who is a neonatal care nurse and a member of the Oregon Nurses Association, to talk about healthcare, not warfare. Hello out there. I want to thank you for staying and listening to all these speeches, and I'm going to get you involved to start off here. So chant with me. Healthcare is a human right, not just for the rich and white. Healthcare is a human right, not just for the rich and white. Healthcare is a human right, not just for the rich and white. Healthcare is a human right, not just for the rich and white. Thank you. There are so many good reasons to end this war. The one that I want to talk to you about today is healthcare. And I'm going to start with a few numbers. Some of them you know. Most of us are aware that almost 4,000 of our U.S. troops have been killed in this war. We see this number every day, and we hear the stories that really hit home when it's someone from Portland. Or for me, it's when it's someone who's the same age as my 19-year-old son. A number that we can't call up so easily is 600,000, which is a fairly conservative estimate of the number of Iraqi civilians that have been killed as of the end of 2006. Boo is right. Because I work as a neonatal nurse, I'm especially horrified at the estimated number of Iraqi children who have been killed. Approximately 43% of those Iraqi civilian deaths have been children, representing a total of over 260,000 Iraqi children. And I want to repeat that because this is not a number that we're hearing. Over 260,000 Iraqi children have been killed in this war. And since the 1990s, healthcare conditions have deteriorated for all Iraqis, and infant mortality has tripled and is getting worse every year. And then there are the wounded. These are more numbers that we don't hear. There are over 30,000 Americans that have been wounded, and probably close to 2 million Iraqis. We don't hear these numbers, but they're important because war wounds are so much more serious and debilitating than the other kinds of wounds that we generally think about. And these numbers represent an unfathomable amount of human suffering. I wish that we had to look at pictures. We don't see the pictures. If we had to look at our TVs every night and see pictures of folks in Iraqi that have been shot and bombed, that are bleeding and dying in the streets and in their homes, I truly believe that the argument about how much longer to continue this insanity would fundamentally change. The number of Americans and Iraqis killed in this war represents a healthcare tragedy. And then there's the healthcare tragedy that we're facing here at home. And they're not unrelated. At the same time that American companies are making obscene profits in Iraq, in military contracts and reconstruction, there are many American companies here at home making enormous profits in healthcare. So we're spending over $2 trillion on healthcare in this country. And because we have a private for-profit system, over 30% of that money is going to corporate profits, stock options, CEO salaries, and advertising and marketing. That's right. That 30% represents over $500 billion every year that's spent in healthcare that's not actually going to take care of people. That's right. That companies can make this much money in healthcare profits is wrong. And at the same time, the number of people who don't have healthcare or are paying more for less and less healthcare has skyrocketed since the war began. You may know these numbers. In 2003, when the war started, 45 million Americans did not have health insurance. And now, in 2007, over 48 million don't have health insurance. So that's 3 million more since the war started. And over 18,000 Americans are dying every year here at home because they don't have health care. Here's one more number. We're spending over $140 billion a year on the war, and that's twice as much as it would take to cover all the uninsured in this country. So we should be spending our money here in ways that are serving people and not the corporations. And I want the war to be over so we can fight for it. I look at you and I think if you all could join together and spend the time you spend here working to pass ballot measure 50 up in November, we would pass it and every child in this state would have health care. And those of us, like you, that want to help create a national health care system based on the principle that health care is a fundamental human right and should not be designed to maximize profit, but should be designed to maximize the health and happiness of everyone in this country. We can be working together to make it happen. Thank you.
What we're asking for is hope. What we're asking for is grace. And we're asking that